My name is Harlan Whitmore, and I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I believe that love was something you found once, if you were lucky, and held on to with everything you had. I believe that when it ended, so did that chapter of your heart. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. What I'm about to tell you isn't a fairy tale, though it might sound like one at times. It's the story of how I learned that the heart doesn't retire, doesn't give up, and certainly doesn't stop hoping, even when you think you've used up all your chances. This is about loss and rediscovery, about grief and joy walking hand in hand, about finding something precious when you weren't even looking for it anymore. They say lightning doesn't strike twice, but sometimes, if you're standing in the right place at the right time, it does. And let me tell you, it can knock you flat on your back just as hard at 70 as it did at 25. I met Margaret when I was 23 years old at a church social in Indianapolis. She was wearing a yellow dress that matched the sunshine in her smile. And when she laughed, Lord, when she laughed, the whole room seemed to lean in just to hear it again. We were married within a year, and for 46 years, she was the rhythm to which my life kept time. Margaret wasn't perfect. She had a stubborn streak wider than the Ohio River and an unfortunate habit of reorganizing my workshop whenever she got bored. But she was mine and I was hers, and that was all that mattered. We raised 3 children together, weathered financial storms, celebrated grandchildren, and grew old in the same house where we'd hung our first Christmas stockings as newlyweds. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I won't burden you with all the details of those final months, the hospitals, the treatments that stole her hair and her energy, but couldn't steal her grace. What I will tell you is this: watching someone you love fade away is like watching the tide go out, knowing it will never come back in. Every day, there was a little less of her, and a little more of the goodbye we both knew was coming. She died on a Tuesday morning in September, with autumn sunlight streaming through the hospice window and her hand in mine. Her last words to me were, "Don't you dare stop living, Harlan Whitmore. Promise me." I promised, but I didn't know how much that promise would cost me. The first year after Margaret's death, I moved through life like a ghost haunting his own existence. I went through the motions, ate meals I didn't taste, attended church services where the hymns sounded hollow, smiled at my children and grandchildren while feeling nothing but a vast emptiness where my heart used to be. People kept telling me it would get easier. They were right, though not in the way I expected. It didn't hurt less. I just got better at carrying the weight. By the 3rd year, I'd established a routine: coffee at dawn, breakfast at the diner on Maple Street every Tuesday and Thursday, volunteer work at the library on weekends, dinner with my daughter Patricia every Sunday. I kept busy. Staying busy was the trick, I'd learned. An idle mind was a dangerous thing when you were trying not to remember too much. I'd also learned to avoid certain places: the botanical gardens where Margaret loved to walk, the Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated every anniversary, that particular aisle in the grocery store where they kept her favorite tea, chamomile with honey. Small landmines, scattered through the landscape of daily life. My children worried about me, Patricia especially. "Dad," she'd say, fixing me with those earnest brown eyes she'd inherited from her mother, "you need to get out more. Meet people. Maybe even, meet someone." I'd smile and change the subject. The truth was, I couldn't imagine it. The idea of being with someone who wasn't Margaret felt like a betrayal, like I'd be erasing her somehow. Besides, what woman would want a 70-year-old widower with arthritis in his knees and hearing aids in both ears? That's what I believed. That's what I told myself for 5 long years. And then I met Vivian. It happened on a Thursday in October, 5 years and 1 month after Margaret's death. I decided to venture into a new bookstore that had opened downtown, Fletcher's Used Books. My daughter had mentioned it, Said they had a good collection of history books, which was my weakness. The place was exactly as I'd hoped. Cramped, dusty, smelling of old paper and possibility. Narrow aisles wound between floor-to-ceiling shelves, and the late afternoon light filtered through front windows that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Carter administration. I was in the military history section, examining a worn copy of Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers, when I heard her voice. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Could you help me reach that book on the top shelf? The blue one, just there." I turned, and there she was. She was tall, nearly 5'9", I'd guess, with silver hair cut short in a way that looked both practical and elegant. She wore wire-rimmed glasses, a burgundy cardigan over a simple white blouse, and had the kind of face that made you think of intelligence and kindness in equal measure. Her eyes were green. Not just green, but the color of sea glass, or new leaves in spring. "Of course," I managed, reaching up for the book. My hand trembled slightly. From age or something else, I wasn't sure. "This one?" "Yes, thank you so much." She took it from me, and our fingers brushed for just a moment. The touch was electric, unexpected, and I pulled back as if I'd been burned. "I'm not as tall as I used to be, I'm afraid. We shrink, they tell us, but no one mentions how inconvenient it is." I laughed. Actually laughed, for what felt like the first time in years. "Tell me about it. I used to be 6'1". Now I'm barely scraping 6 feet." "Well, you're still tall enough to be useful, so there's that." She smiled, and I felt something shift in my chest, like a door I'd locked years ago, suddenly creaking open. "I'm Vivienne, by the way. Vivienne Ashford. Harlan Whitmore." We shook hands, and this time I was ready for the warmth of her touch, though it still caught me off guard. "Pleased to meet you, Harlan." She glanced at the book in my hand. "Ambrose? A history enthusiast? Guilty as charged. World War II specifically, though I'll read anything about the American Revolution too." Her face lit up. "Oh, wonderful. I'm teaching a course on the Civil War at the community college. Just for fun, really. I'm retired, but it's so rare to meet someone who actually cares about history beyond what they half remember from high school." We stood there in that cramped aisle, talking about books, about history, about the sorry state of modern education and how young people today didn't understand the importance of knowing where we'd come from. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, like water finding its level. I don't know how long we talked, 20 minutes? An hour? But when we finally parted ways, I'd agreed to meet her for coffee the following Tuesday to discuss a book she was recommending. I walked out of Fletcher's used books feeling lighter than I had in 5 years, and simultaneously guilty for feeling that way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about green eyes and silver hair and the way she'd smiled when she talked about teaching. And I felt Margaret's absence more keenly than I had in months, as if by letting in a moment of happiness, I'd somehow betrayed her memory. I almost didn't go to that coffee date. I stood outside the cafe, a little place called Brood Awakenings, for a full 5 minutes, debating whether to walk in or walk away. My heart was pounding like a teenager's, which was ridiculous. I was 73 years old, for heaven's sake. This was just coffee with someone who shared an interest in history, nothing more. But it felt like more, and that terrified me. I went in. Vivienne was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of her. She waved when she saw me, and that smile of hers, it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I took a chance and ordered for you," she said as I sat down. "Black coffee, 2 sugars. Was I right?" "Completely right. How did you—" "You strike me as a practical man. No fancy lattes or complicated orders. Just good, straightforward coffee." She pushed 1 cup toward me. "Besides, it's what my late husband always drank. I figured I had a 50-50 shot." That word, late husband, changed everything. Suddenly, we weren't just 2 people meeting for coffee. We were two people who understood loss, who carried the weight of absence with them wherever they went. How long? I asked quietly. 7 years. Heart attack. One minute he was laughing at something on television, the next, she trailed off, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. You? 5 years. Cancer. We sat in silence for a moment, honoring the ghosts between us. Then Vivian looked up, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Isn't it strange how we can miss them so much and still be sitting here, drinking coffee, talking to someone new? I've been feeling guilty about that, I admitted, about enjoying your company, like I'm being disloyal somehow. I know exactly what you mean, but Harlan, can I tell you something my daughter told me that helped? She leaned forward, her eyes intense. She said, "Mom, Dad didn't love you so you could stop living when he died. He loved you so you could have a beautiful life. Honor that by having one." Those words hit me like a physical blow. They were almost exactly what Margaret had said to me in that hospice room. Don't you dare stop living. After that day, Vivian and I began meeting regularly, coffee every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Then we added Saturday afternoon walks through Riverside Park. Then Sunday dinner at a little French bistro that neither of us had been to before. Neutral territory, unconnected to our previous lives. We talked about everything. Our childhoods, hers in Maine, mine in Indiana. Our careers. She'd been a high school English teacher for 35 years. I'd worked in insurance, which sounded boring but had its moments. Our children and grandchildren. Our favorite books, movies, meals, memories. And slowly, carefully, we talked about our spouses, about Margaret's laugh and how she could never tell a joke without starting to giggle before the punchline, about Vivian's husband Robert, who'd been a carpenter and made her a different bookshelf for every room in their house, about the little things we missed, the way Margaret hummed while cooking, the way Robert always left his reading glasses on top of his head and forgot they were there. Talking about them with someone who understood grief made it easier somehow. Vivian never acted jealous or uncomfortable when I mentioned Margaret. She'd nod, smile, sometimes share a similar memory of Robert. We were honoring our pasts while building something new, and there was a rightness to that. But I was also falling in love. There's no other way to say it. At 73 years old, with gray hair and creaky joints and a lifetime of living behind me, I was falling in love again. It terrified me. It thrilled me. It made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The moment I knew I loved Vivian came on a cold evening in December. We'd been seeing each other for 2 months by then, though neither of us had defined what we were doing. Dating? Courting? Two lonely people keeping each other company? We didn't label it. It had started snowing that afternoon. Big, fat flakes that transformed the city into something magical. Vivian had invited me to her apartment for dinner. The first time I'd been to her home. It was a cozy place on the 3rd floor of an older building, with bookshelves lining every wall and plants on every available surface. I'm not much of a cook, she'd warned me, but I make a decent lasagna. It was more than decent. We ate at her small kitchen table, with candles flickering and snow falling outside the window, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Margaret died. I felt at home. After dinner, we moved to her living room. She put on some jazz, Miles Davis Kind of Blue, and we sat on her couch, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of her. "Harlan," she said softly, "can I ask you something? Anything. Where do you think this is going, you and me?" She turned to look at me, and in the candlelight, those green eyes were luminous. "Because I need to know. I'm not young anymore. I don't have time to waste on something that isn't real, and this feels real to me. But I need to know if it feels real to you, too." My heart was hammering. This was it, the moment where I had to decide whether to step forward into possibility or retreat into the safety of my grief. I thought of Margaret, of her last words to me. Don't you dare stop living. I thought of the past 5 years, of the loneliness that had become so familiar I'd almost stopped noticing it. Of Sunday dinners at Patricia's where I smiled and nodded and felt like I was watching life through a window instead of living it. And I thought of the past 2 months with Vivienne, the laughter, the conversations that made hours feel like minutes, the way my chest felt lighter when I knew I was going to see her, the fact that I'd started looking forward to tomorrow again. It feels real to me, I said, my voice rough with emotion. Vivienne, I haven't felt this way since Margaret, and that scares me to death, but it also makes me feel like I'm finally waking up after a very long sleep. She reached for my hand, laced her fingers through mine. I'm scared too. Losing someone once is hard enough. Letting yourself love again means risking that loss all over again. But Harlan, isn't the alternative worse? Spending whatever time we have left alone when we could spend it together? I looked at our joined hands, both marked by age, by liver spots and prominent veins, and skin that had grown thin with the years. They weren't young hands, but they were alive, warm, real. Yes, I said. Yes, it would be worse. I kissed her then. The first kiss in 5 years that wasn't a memory. It was soft, tentative, and utterly right. In the weeks that followed, as Vivienne and I navigated this new relationship, I learned several things that I think anyone facing love after loss needs to understand. First, loving again isn't betrayal. For months, I'd felt guilty every time I laughed with Vivienne, every time I felt happy in her presence. It took my daughter Patricia, wise beyond her years, to set me straight. Dad, she said one Sunday over dinner, do you think Mom would want you to be lonely? No. But... No buts. Mom loved you. Part of loving someone is wanting them to be happy even after you're gone, especially after you're gone. She squeezed my hand. Vivienne doesn't replace Mom. She's not supposed to. She's just the next chapter. And Mom would want you to have that chapter. Second, the heart is more resilient than we give it credit for. I'd believed that after Margaret, my heart was done, that I'd used up my capacity for romantic love. But the heart doesn't work like that. It doesn't have a quota or a limit. It grows to accommodate what we give it, expanding and contracting like a living thing, which, of course, it is. Third, love looks different at 70 than it does at 25, and that's not a bad thing. When I fell for Margaret, it was all fireworks and intensity, staying up all night talking, barely able to keep our hands off each other. With Vivienne, love was quieter, deeper. It was comfortable silences and shared laughter. It was understanding without words. It was two people who'd been broken, finding that their jagged edges fit together in unexpected ways. We took things slow, Vivienne and I. Neither of us was in a hurry. We'd learned that lesson the hard way, that time is precious, yes, but rushing toward the future means missing the present. So we savored our coffee dates, our walks, our long conversations about everything and nothing. We also talked honestly about our limitations and fears, about health concerns, my blood pressure, her occasional vertigo, about our children and whether they'd accept this relationship, about practical matters like finances and living arrangements if things got serious. These weren't romantic conversations, but they were necessary ones. At our age, love required not just emotion, but wisdom, not just passion, but pragmatism. The first real test came in February, when Vivienne and I decided it was time to introduce each other to our families. I was nervous as hell. My 3 children, Patricia, Robert Jr., and Susan, had been supportive in theory, but I wasn't sure how they'd react to meeting the woman who was becoming central to my life. We arranged a family dinner at Patricia's house. Patricia cooked her mother's pot roast recipe, which I thought was either a good sign or a terrible one. Vivienne arrived with homemade brownies and a nervous smile that mirrored my own. The evening started stiffly. My children were polite but cautious, asking Vivienne questions that felt more like a job interview than a family dinner. Where did she grow up? What did she do for a living? How did she spend her time? It was my youngest grandson, 7-year-old Thomas, who broke the ice. He'd been watching Vivienne carefully all evening, and finally he climbed up on the chair next to her and asked, "Are you Grandpa's girlfriend?" The table went silent. Vivienne looked at me, then at Thomas, and smiled. "I suppose I am. Is that okay with you? Do you make Grandpa happy?" "I try to. Does he seem happy to you?" Thomas considered this seriously, then nodded. "Yeah, he smiles more now. He didn't smile much before." Out of the mouths of babes. That simple observation from a 7-year-old changed the entire atmosphere. Because it was true. I did smile more. I laughed more. I was more present, more engaged with life. After that, the evening relaxed. Stories were shared, laughter flowed more freely, and when Vivienne got up to help Patricia clear the dishes, I saw them talking in the kitchen. Really talking, not just being polite. When they came back, Patricia's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Later, as I walked Vivienne to her car, she took my hand. "Your children are wonderful, Harlan, and they love you very much. They like you, I could tell." Patricia told me something in the kitchen. She said, "Thank you for giving my father back to us." I asked her what she meant, and she said that after your wife died, you were physically there, but not really present. You were just going through the motions. But now you're engaged again, alive again. Vivienne's voice caught. "That's all I want, Harlan, to help you be alive again, and for you to help me be alive again too." Meeting Vivienne's family was easier in some ways, harder in others. She had 2 children, a daughter, Caroline, and a son, James, and they were protective of their mother. Understandably so. But they too saw what Thomas had seen, that their mother was happier, lighter, more herself than she'd been since their father died. And ultimately, that's what won them over. Not my charm or credentials, but the simple fact that I made their mother smile as winter gave way to spring. Vivienne and I fell into a rhythm that felt like our own. We maintained our separate apartments. Neither of us was ready for more than that, but we spent most of our time together. We'd have breakfast at my place, lunch at hers. We'd attend concerts, visit museums, take day trips to small towns we'd never been to before. We also established traditions. Every Sunday morning, we'd go to different churches. I was Presbyterian, she was Episcopalian, alternating weeks. Then we'd have brunch and talk about the sermon, finding the common threads between our different denominations, the universal truths that transcended the specifics of ritual. Every Thursday, we'd volunteer together at the food bank, working side by side, distributing canned goods and fresh produce to families who needed help, gave us a sense of purpose beyond ourselves. And there was something profound about building a relationship not just on shared pleasure, but shared service. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. We had our disagreements, our difficult moments. There was the time I snapped at her for rearranging my kitchen cabinets, echoes of Margaret, that should have been a sign. There was the time she got frustrated with me for being late. I'd forgotten my hearing aids and didn't hear the phone when she called to ask where I was. There was the evening we argued about politics, a subject we'd carefully avoided until then, and I went home angry, convinced we were too different to make this work. But here's what I learned. Conflict in a relationship isn't the problem. It's how you handle the conflict that matters. And we learned to handle it. We learned to apologize when we were wrong. We learned to compromise. We learned to recognize when we were really angry at each other versus when we were just tired or hungry or stressed about something else entirely. We also learned to be honest about the hard stuff, like the day Vivienne had to tell me she'd found a lump in her breast and was terrified it was cancer. It turned out to be benign, thank God, but those 2 weeks waiting for test results were among the hardest of my life. or the day I had to admit that my short-term memory was getting worse, and I was scared it was the beginning of dementia. My doctor said it was normal age-related decline, but the fear had been real. These conversations were painful, but they were also bonding because we learned that we could face this scary stuff together. We didn't have to pretend to be stronger or healthier or more capable than we were. We could be vulnerable with each other, and that vulnerability created intimacy in a way that nothing else could. It was May, 8 months after that first meeting in Fletcher's used books, when I realized I wanted to marry Vivienne. The realization came suddenly while we were sitting in my living room, reading in comfortable silence. She was on one end of the couch, I was on the other, our feet meeting in the middle. She was absorbed in a mystery novel. I was supposed to be reading the newspaper, but was actually just watching her. She looked up and caught me staring. "What?" "I was just thinking how right this feels, you being here." She smiled. "It does feel right, doesn't it?" "Vivienne, what would you say if I asked you to marry me?" She put her book down slowly. "Is that a hypothetical question, Harlan?" "I'm not sure. I'm testing the waters, I guess. I know it's fast. I know we're old to be talking about marriage. But I love you, and I want whatever time I have left to be spent with you officially." She was quiet for a long moment, and my heart sank. I'd moved too fast, pushed too hard, scared her off. Then she said I would say yes, but I'd want us to think carefully about what marriage means at our age. We both have children, estates, medical directives. We'd need to be practical. So that's a yes. That's a let's talk about it seriously and figure out if it makes sense. She moved across the couch, taking my hand. "But Harlan, for what it's worth, I love you too. And if we can figure out the details, I'd be honored to be your wife." We did talk about it seriously. We consulted with our children, our lawyers, our financial advisors. We talked about prenuptial agreements to protect our respective estates for our children. We talked about healthcare proxies and living wills. We talked about whether to sell both apartments and buy a place together or keep one of them. We talked about what happens when one of us inevitably faces serious health issues, when caregiving becomes necessary. These weren't romantic conversations, but they were loving ones, because love at our age meant being responsible, being realistic, being prepared. It meant acknowledging that the odds were good that one of us would have to say goodbye to the other, probably sooner rather than later. And it meant deciding that the joy of being together was worth the eventual pain of loss. We got married on a Saturday in September, almost exactly 6 years after Margaret's death. It was a small ceremony in the garden of a local inn, just family and a handful of close friends. I wore my best suit. Vivienne wore a simple cream-colored dress that made her look radiant. The night before the wedding, Patricia came to my apartment. She was carrying something wrapped in tissue paper. "I wanted to give you this, Dad. I've been holding on to it." Waiting for the right moment, I unwrapped it carefully. It was a photograph of Margaret and me on our wedding day, young and impossibly happy. Tucked into the frame was a note in Margaret's handwriting. Patricia explained, "Mom wrote this about a year before she died. She gave it to me and told me to give it to you if you ever found someone new." My hand shook as I read. "My darling Harlan, if you're reading this, it means you found someone who makes you happy again. Good. I was hoping you would. Don't feel guilty, my love. Don't think you're betraying me or replacing me. You're not. What we had was beautiful, and it will always be ours. But you deserve more beauty in your life, and I'm glad you found it. Love her well. Love her the way you loved me, with your whole heart, with patience and kindness and laughter. And when you think of me, remember the good times. Remember that I loved you from the first moment I saw you until the last breath I took. Go be happy, Harlan. That's all I ever wanted for you. All my love, always, Margaret." I wept reading that note. Tears of grief, yes, but also tears of gratitude and relief. Margaret had given me her blessing, and I hadn't even known I needed it until I had it. The next day, standing in that garden with Vivian, I felt Margaret's presence, not as a ghost or a shadow, but as a gift. She had loved me well enough that I could love again. That was her final gift to me, and I was determined to honor it. The ceremony was simple. We wrote our own vows, standing before the gathered witnesses with the kind of honesty that only comes with age. I said, "Vivian, I promise to love you for however long we have. I promise to be present, to be honest, to be kind even when it's hard. I promise to honor your past and build a future with you. I promise to make you laugh, to listen when you need to talk, and to hold your hand through whatever comes." She said, "Harlan, I promise to cherish you, to respect you, to choose you every day. I promise to be patient with your quirks and forgiving of your faults. I promise to share my life with you fully, the joys and the sorrows, the mundane and the magnificent. I promise to grow old with you, in whatever time we have left." When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, we kissed to applause and laughter. And I felt, truly felt, that I was beginning again, not forgetting my past, but building on it. I'm writing this now, 3 years after that wedding day. Vivi and I are still together, still in love, still discovering new things about each other and about life. It hasn't all been easy. I've had a health scare, a minor heart attack that turned out to be angina, and Vivian's arthritis has gotten worse. But we face these challenges together, and that makes all the difference. Looking back on this journey, from the devastation of losing Margaret to the joy of finding Vivian, I've learned some things I wish I could tell my younger self. But since I can't do that, I'll share them with you instead. First, grief and joy can coexist. For a long time, I thought I had to choose between honoring Margaret's memory and being happy again. But that's a false choice. I carry Margaret with me every day, and I'm also deeply happy with Vivian. These two truths don't contradict each other. They exist side by side, two streams flowing together. Second, it's never too late to start over. Society tells us that romance is for the young, that by the time you're 70, you should be content with memories and grandchildren. That's nonsense. The heart doesn't retire. Love doesn't have an expiration date. If you're lucky enough to find connection at any age, grab it with both hands. Third, love looks different the second time around, and that's okay. I loved Margaret with the fierce passion of youth. I love Vivienne with the deep contentment of age. Both are valid. Both are beautiful. They're just different chapters of the same story. Fourth, don't let fear rob you of possibility. I almost didn't go into that bookstore. I almost didn't show up for that first coffee date. I almost let fear and guilt keep me from something wonderful. Don't make that mistake. Yes, loving again means risking loss again. But the alternative, shutting yourself off from life, is a loss too, just a slower one. Fifth, practical matters aren't unromantic. Talking about prenups and healthcare proxies might not be candlelit dinner conversation, but at our age, these discussions are acts of love. They're how we protect each other and our families. They're how we show respect and responsibility. Romance and pragmatism aren't opposites. They're partners. Sixth, community matters. Vivian and I didn't do this alone. We had children who supported us, friends who encouraged us, professionals who helped us navigate the practical challenges. Don't try to go it alone. Let people help you. Let them celebrate with you. Finally, every day is a gift. At 76, I'm acutely aware that my time is finite. I don't know if I have 10 more years or 10 more months. None of us do really, but we pretend we do when we're young. Age strips away that illusion. And that's not depressing, it's clarifying. It makes every morning coffee with Vivian precious. Every laugh, every conversation, every shared meal, they're all treasures, because I know they won't last forever. This morning, Vivian and I had breakfast on our balcony, watching the sun come up. She was reading the newspaper. I was watching the birds at the feeder we'd hung last spring. At one point, she reached over and took my hand, and we just sat there, two old people holding hands in the morning light. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking how lucky I am. To have loved Margaret, to love you, to have been given this second chance." She squeezed my hand. "I'm the lucky one. We both are," I said, and I meant it. If you're reading this and you've lost someone you loved, I want you to know, it's okay to grieve. Take all the time you need, but also know that it's okay to hope again, to laugh again, to love again. You're not betraying anyone's memory by choosing to live fully. You're honoring it. Love after 60 isn't what I expected. It's quieter, deeper, more grateful. It's two people who know how precious time is, choosing to spend it together. It's companionship and passion, comfort and adventure, loss and renewal, all woven together. And it's possible, even when you think it isn't. Even when you've given up hope. Even when you think you're too old, too broken, too set in your ways. Lightning can strike twice. I'm living proof. So keep your heart open. Keep showing up. Keep choosing life, even when it's hard. Because you never know when you might walk into a dusty bookstore and find something, someone, worth hoping for again. That's my story. That's my truth. And if an old widower like me can find love at 73, then there's hope for anyone. Don't you dare stop living. That's what Margaret told me. That's what I'm telling you. The best might still be ahead.